The man behind the desk laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from the chest when someone thinks they've already won. He held the paper between two fingers like it was something he'd found stuck to his shoe, and he turned it toward the woman beside him so she could see it too. "This," he said, loud enough for the three people waiting in the lobby to hear him, "is what he brought us. A piece of notebook paper, with his handwriting on it." The woman beside him smiled the way people smile when they've been told to. Walter Hayes did not move. He was sitting in the chair across from the desk with his hands folded in his lap and his hat resting on his knee. He was 72 years old. He had driven 41 miles that morning to be there at 9. He had been sitting in that chair for 11 minutes. He looked at the man behind the desk, and he did not say anything at all. "Mr. Hayes," the man said, recovering himself, still smiling. "I understand this is difficult, but this isn't a will. This is a note. And the bank cannot release $473,000 based on a note." Walter looked at the paper in the man's hand. Then he looked at the man's face. Then he reached for his hat. "I'd like a copy of what you just said," Walter said, "in writing." The man stopped smiling. Walter Hayes was born in 1953 in Brunswick County, Virginia, and had lived on the same 160 acres for 68 of those years. The land had come to him from his father, and to his father from a great-uncle who had cleared the lower fields by hand in 1908. There was a creek that ran along the western fence line, and an oak tree near the house that was older than the house itself, and a small fenced plot under that oak where his wife Margaret had been buried 2 years and 4 months earlier. Margaret Hayes had been a school teacher for 36 years. She had taught 4th grade in the same building where she had been a 4th grader herself. She kept her receipts in shoeboxes labeled by year, and her recipes in a binder, and her important papers in a green metal filing cabinet in the back bedroom that had 3 drawers and a lock she never used because she said anyone who needed to break into a filing cabinet had bigger problems than she did. Walter had farmed that land for 51 years. He had grown soybeans and corn, and for a stretch in the 80s, tobacco. He had lost 2 crops to drought, and 1 to a flood, and 1 to a hailstorm that came through in July and took everything down to the dirt in 19 minutes. He had not missed a mortgage payment in 43 years. He had paid off the land in 2009 and framed the satisfaction letter and hung it in the kitchen above the coffee pot, where Margaret could see it every morning. When Margaret got sick in the spring of 2023, she handled it the way she handled everything else. Quietly, methodically. She made lists. She wrote things down. She did not tell Walter how bad it was until she had to, and when she did, she had already organized everything he would need: the accounts, the deeds, the truck title, the insurance. She put it all in the green filing cabinet, in folders, in her teacher's handwriting, alphabetical. She also wrote a will, by hand, on a single sheet of yellow legal paper. She wrote it in the kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon in June, and she had Walter and their neighbor Earl Brackett sign as witnesses, and she had it notarized 2 days later by a woman named Doris Pennington, who ran a small notary service out of a corner of her insurance office in town. Doris stamped it. Doris signed it. Doris kept a copy in her own records, the way she kept copies of everything that crossed her desk, because she had been doing that work for 31 years, and she had learned a long time ago that copies were the only thing that ever saved anybody. Margaret died in October. Walter buried her under the oak. 8 months later, he walked into the First Carolina Trust branch in town to release the funds in the joint money market account that had been in both their names for 26 years. $473,000, their entire savings. Money for the taxes, for the equipment, for the years still ahead. That was the morning he met Brennan Cole. Brennan Cole was 33 years old. He had a master's in finance from a school in Charlotte, and he had been the assistant branch manager at First Carolina Trust for 14 months, and he had been told by his regional director that the branch's estate resolution costs were running 12% over target for the quarter. He had a spreadsheet open on his second monitor. The spreadsheet was sorted by account size descending. Walter Hayes' account was the third one on the list. Brennan Cole had spent 14 minutes reviewing the file before Walter arrived. He had looked at the handwritten will, and he had looked at the notary stamp, and he had looked at the date, and he had decided, in the way that young men with master's degrees sometimes decide things, that this was not going to be a problem. The will was handwritten. There was no attorney named. The witnesses were the husband himself and a neighbor. In Brennan Cole's professional judgment, this was an opportunity. He explained it to Walter the way he had been trained to. He used the words informal instrument. He used the words standard probate process. He explained that the bank could not, in good conscience, release such a sum on the basis of a document that had not been prepared by a licensed estate attorney. He suggested that Walter retain counsel and proceed through the courts, which would likely take between 9 and 14 months, and that in the interim, the funds would remain in escrow. He said all of this with the careful, patient tone of a man explaining a complicated thing to someone he assumed could not understand it. Walter listened. He did not interrupt. When Brennan Cole was done, Walter stood up, put his hat on, and drove home. He did not call a lawyer that day. He drove home, and he sat at the kitchen table, and he looked at the satisfaction letter framed above the coffee pot. Then he went into the back bedroom and opened the green filing cabinet. He pulled out the folder labeled Will, Testament, Final Wishes in Margaret's handwriting. He sat with it on his knees for a long time. Inside the folder was the original handwritten will, Margaret's signature, his signature, Earl Brackett's signature, Doris Pennington's notary stamp, dated June 14, 2023. And clipped behind it, on a separate page, a receipt from Doris Pennington's office showing the notarization fee of $15 and the registration number assigned to the document in her ledger. Walter sat with that for a while. Then he picked up the phone. He didn't call a lawyer first. He called Doris. Doris Pennington was 68 years old, and she had been a notary public in Brunswick County since 1995. She remembered Margaret Hayes. She remembered the day Margaret had come in. She remembered, specifically, that Margaret had brought a small tin of lemon bars she had baked that morning, and that she had sat across from Doris's desk with her hands folded and said, "I want this done right, because Walter doesn't deserve to fight anyone after I'm gone." Doris remembered all of it. She also had it written down, in her ledger, in her files, in the duplicate copies she had kept, signed and stamped and dated, in the locked cabinet behind her desk, where she had been keeping copies of every document she had ever notarized for 31 years. When Walter told her what the bank had said, Doris Pennington was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Walter, you come in tomorrow morning. Bring the will, bring whatever else you have. I'll be ready." Walter went the next morning. Doris had pulled her copy. She had pulled her ledger, opened to the page dated June 14, 2023, with Margaret Hayes' name written in Doris's own hand and the registration number beside it. She had also, overnight, called a lawyer she trusted, a woman named Eleanor Briggs, who practiced 2 towns over and who handled estate work and did not particularly care for banks. Eleanor Briggs was 59. She had been practicing for 31 years. When Walter walked into her office that afternoon with the folder under his arm, she shook his hand and asked him to sit down, and she read the will twice, slowly, the second time with her finger moving along each line. Then she looked at the notary stamp. Then she looked at Doris's ledger entry, which Doris had photocopied and clipped to the back. She set the folder down. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I have to be honest with you. I don't know yet if we'll win this without a fight. Holographic wills are recognized in Virginia, but banks push back on them, especially for amounts this size. I'd be lying if I told you this was simple." Walter nodded. "I'm not in a hurry," he said. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded back. "All right," she said. "Then let's do it right." What Eleanor Briggs did next was not complicated, but it was thorough. She did not call the bank. She did not write to Brennan Cole. She filed a petition with the Brunswick County Circuit Court for the formal admission of Margaret Hayes' holographic will to probate, supported by the affidavit of Doris Pennington as the notary of record, the affidavit of Earl Brackett as the surviving witness, and Doris's contemporaneous ledger entry from June 14, 2023. She also requested, as a matter of routine, that First Carolina Trust produce its complete file on the matter, including all internal communications, all notes, and any documentation related to the bank's decision to refuse release of the funds. That request landed on Brennan Cole's desk on a Tuesday morning. He read it twice. Then he forwarded it to the regional office. Then he sat at his desk for a while and did not do anything at all. The hearing was set for a Thursday in late September, 14 weeks after the petition was filed. The courtroom was on the second floor of the county courthouse, a small, wood-paneled room with an American flag in the corner and a Virginia flag beside it, and 3 rows of benches that had been polished so many times the wood had gone soft at the edges. The judge was the Honorable Marcus Whitfield, 64 years old, 22 years on the bench, known in the county for reading every filing the night before and for asking questions that made expensive lawyers wish they had stayed home. Brennan Cole arrived 20 minutes early with 2 attorneys from the bank's regional counsel. Both were younger than him. Both carried matching black leather folders. They sat at the table on the right side of the room and arranged their papers and spoke to each other in low voices. Walter Hayes arrived 10 minutes early, alone. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to Margaret's funeral. Eleanor Briggs walked in behind him. Doris Pennington came in 2 minutes after that and sat in the second row with her ledger on her lap. Earl Brackett came in last and sat beside Doris. Judge Whitfield entered at exactly 10 o'clock. The bank's lead attorney spoke first. He spoke for 19 minutes. He used phrases like informal testamentary instrument and the bank's fiduciary obligation to act with prudence and the absence of any professionally drafted estate plan. He suggested that the document, while perhaps sentimentally significant, did not meet the threshold of formality that an institution of First Carolina Trust's standing was required to honor. He suggested that the proper course was a full probate proceeding, attorney-supervised, with a court-appointed administrator. Judge Whitfield listened without expression. When the attorney was finished, the judge looked across the room. Ms. Briggs. Eleanor Briggs stood up. She did not have notes. Your Honor, she said, Virginia recognizes holographic wills. Margaret Hayes's will is in her handwriting. It is signed by her. It is witnessed by her husband and her neighbor. It was notarized by a notary public of this county the same week it was written, and the notary's contemporaneous record confirms the date, the parties, and the document. The bank's objection is not a legal objection. It is an inconvenience objection. She sat down. Judge Whitfield turned to the document on his bench. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he looked up at the bank's table. Mr. Cole, he said. Brennan Cole stood up. He had not been expecting to be addressed directly. Yes, Your Honor. How long did you spend reviewing Mrs. Hayes's will before you advised Mr. Hayes that the bank would not release the funds? Brennan Cole opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I would have to consult my notes, Your Honor. Mr. Cole, the bank produced its file. I read it last night. According to your own time-stamped log, you opened the file at 8:46 in the morning and you closed it at 9 o'clock. Is that correct? The room was very quiet. That sounds approximately correct, Your Honor. 14 minutes. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitfield set the will down on his bench. He looked at the bank's table. He looked at the regional attorneys with their matching black folders. Then he looked back at Brennan Cole. Mrs. Hayes spent 36 years teaching 4th grade in this county, the judge said. I know because she taught my daughter. She wrote this will herself because she did not want her husband to have to fight anyone after she was gone. She had it notarized the same week. The notary is in this room. The witness is in this room. And you spent 14 minutes deciding her instructions weren't good enough. Nobody spoke. The petition is granted, Judge Whitfield said. The will is admitted to probate. First Carolina Trust will release the funds in full to Mr. Hayes within 10 business days. The bank will also bear Mr. Hayes's legal costs and Ms. Pennington's appearance fee. Mr. Cole, I would suggest that the next time a 72-year-old widower walks into your branch with his wife's handwritten will, you give him more than 14 minutes. He brought down the gavel. The funds were released 8 days later. Eleanor Briggs sent Walter a final invoice that the bank paid in full. Brennan Cole was reassigned 3 weeks after the hearing to a smaller branch 2 counties away. Doris Pennington went back to notarizing documents in the corner of the insurance office, and she still keeps every copy. Walter drove home the afternoon of the hearing. He did not stop in town. He did not call anyone. He went home, and he changed out of the suit, and he hung it back in the closet next to Margaret's coat that he had not yet been able to give away. Then he walked out across the backfield, past the barn, past the fence Earl had helped him repair the spring before, down to the oak tree where Margaret was buried. The afternoon was cool. The leaves were just beginning to turn. He stood at the foot of the small stone for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "I told them you did it right." He stood there a while longer. Then he walked back up to the house. He went into the back bedroom and he took the will out of the folder and he refolded it the way Margaret had folded it, in thirds, and he put it back into the green filing cabinet in the folder marked in her handwriting, and he closed the drawer. There are people in this country who think a piece of yellow paper isn't worth anything. They think the documents that matter are the ones with letterhead and footnotes and signatures from people who charge by the hour. But the documents that matter are usually the ones written at a kitchen table by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and who took the time to do it right because they loved someone enough to make sure he would never have to fight alone. Margaret Hayes knew that. Doris Pennington knew that. Walter Hayes had always known it. The bank found out on a Thursday morning in September. If you've made it this far, you already understand what kind of channel this is. Next time, we're telling the story of a 76-year-old widow in eastern Tennessee whose late husband left her a single envelope marked "Open Only" if they ever try to take the farm. 47 years sealed, 1 sentence inside, and a county clerk who recognized the handwriting before the lawyer ever opened his mouth. Subscribe, and we'll see you there. Paste your script.